They said Sister Aurelia was blind from birth, but no one dared ask how she knew when the crows came. Before a single wing flapped against the dead air, she would raise her chin and whisper, "They've come for someone again." And someone would always vanish, not from the convent, from memory. Even her sisters couldn't recall their faces, as if they had never been born. Welcome to Convent Nightmares, the channel where stories buried by silence find their voice again. Dark, unsettling, and never meant for the light. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe, leave a like, and comment below which country and city you're watching from. Not for engagement, for her. She's listening. Tonight's story is about a nun who gave up her eyes to see what the living were never meant to glimpse. Not heaven, not hell, but something in between. A place where angels scream and mercy is blind. Sister Aurelia didn't lose her sight. She traded it. And when the bargain was sealed, she began to see everything we were never supposed to understand. The convent where she lived sits on a hill no map includes, surrounded by fog that smells like burned parchment and flowers that never bloom. It was a place where silence was law and prayer was punishment. But Aurelia, without ever seeing a book or a candle, could recite verses no one had taught her, verses that bled when spoken aloud. She called them the lightless psalms. No one believed her at first, until she walked into the crypt and found the statue of the Archangel Gabriel, eyes cracked open, weeping blood. The next morning, the Mother Superior was found with her own eyes sewn shut, and on the walls of Aurelia's cell were painted in a hand not hers, "Open them, so they may never close again." They brought Sister Aurelia to the convent in silence, wrapped in wool and warnings. The Mother Superior accepted her without ceremony, but the other sisters whispered prayers behind their teeth. She was 12, blind, fragile, and utterly unafraid. When asked her name, she didn't hesitate. "Aurelia," she said, "like the gold behind the sun." No one had told her the sun was golden. No one had told her anything, but she spoke as if the darkness in her eyes saw far more than anyone else's sight could grasp. The convent was not a place of comfort. The stone corridors echoed with forgotten hymns, and every door creaked like a memory trying to return. The nuns lived by silence, bound by vows, and punished with isolation. But Aurelia moved through the halls with eerie precision. She touched walls others avoided. She hummed songs no one remembered teaching her, and she would pause, sometimes for minutes, listening to corners that seemed empty, until they whispered back. Sister Genevieve was the first to grow afraid. She swore that she saw Aurelia in the chapel one night, standing before the altar, her hands raised towards the crucifix, but not in prayer, in offering. And in her palms she held 2 small stones, wet and red as if freshly plucked from a skull. But when Genevieve lit the lantern, Aurelia was gone. Only the stones remained, until they weren't there either. The other sisters blamed exhaustion, stress, the weight of devotion,
But Genevieve stopped sleeping. She began covering her eyes with cloth, claiming, "She wants us all blind." The daily routines continued. Morning chants, cleaning, prayer, fasting. But around Aurelia, nothing was routine. The bells rang without being touched, candles snuffed themselves, and once a stained glass angel wept during Mass. Her room, small and bare, had only one window, sealed shut since the convent's founding. Yet the wind always found its way in, carrying scents of myrrh, ash, and roses blooming out of season. No one dared ask where she got the petals she left on every windowsill. One evening, Sister Magdalena, curious and defiant, entered Aurelia's cell during Vespers. She found the girl kneeling on the floor, her eyes wide open, milky and useless, and yet staring directly at her. "They're watching," Aurelia whispered. "Not me. Through me." Magdalena fled in tears, claiming she felt wings brush past her face, feathers like razors. That night, every mirror in the convent cracked. The next morning, the chapel door was sealed shut, blood seeping from the lock. The Mother Superior convened a silent meeting, no words spoken, only gestures and eyes filled with fear. Aurelia was placed under observation. Sister Anne was assigned to watch over her. But Anne would later say, with trembling lips, that it wasn't Aurelia she was watching. It was something behind her. A shape, a glow, a flicker of impossible light that darkened everything else. She tried to describe it, but every attempt ended in a sob. "It's like trying to remember a name you never learned," she said. "It hurts." Aurelia began drawing, with charcoal, with ash, with whatever she could scrape against the walls. Not images, symbols, spirals within spirals, eyes within eyes, wings shaped like screaming mouths. None of them matched anything in Scripture. But when Sister Beatrice tried to scrub them clean, her hands blistered and bled. She screamed that the walls were screaming back. The symbols remained, pulsing faintly in the dark like veins beneath stone. By the end of that week, Aurelia stopped speaking altogether. But when the sisters passed her cell, they heard chanting. Not her voice, dozens, echoing in layers, male and female, old and young, all reciting something that didn't rhyme, didn't end, didn't begin. They called it the Psalm Without Origin. And whenever someone heard it, they wept without understanding why. Still, no one dared remove her, no one dared report her. The convent was too remote, too forgotten, and something, perhaps fear, perhaps fascination, rooted them all there, as if the convent itself had chosen her, or worse, been waiting for her. Then came the day she walked into the chapel unaccompanied. No one had seen her leave her locked cell. No one had opened the door. But there she was, standing beneath the crucifix, head tilted back, eyes milky white and glowing faintly gold. "They have spoken," she said to no one. "They showed me what waits behind the veil." And then she smiled, a smile that didn't belong to a child or a nun or a human being. From that moment in the chapel, the air in the convent changed. It no longer smelled of incense and old stone, but of something damp, like soil freshly turned over a shallow grave. The sisters stopped speaking, even in whispers. Their eyes darted constantly, as if some shadow just out of view might speak their name. And in the stillness of midnight, something new joined their prayers. A faint scratching sound, like fingers etching messages from behind the walls. Aurelia no longer ate. Her meals returned untouched, yet she did not grow weak. In fact, her presence became heavier. When she entered a room, the candles flickered even if there was no wind. When she passed by the confessionals, the walls sweated salt. The Mother Superior tried to bless her again, perhaps to undo something unnamed, but Aurelia only bowed her head and said, "That name does not reach me anymore." Sister Anne disappeared the following day. Her veil was found floating in the baptismal font, stained with a single word carved in its fabric: "Listen." They searched the grounds, the cellar, the bell tower, but no one spoke Aurelia's name, not even in prayer. Some started calling her La Cega, the blind one. Others just crossed themselves and stayed away from mirrors, where Aurelia's reflection sometimes lingered longer than it should. In the scriptorium, the ancient books began rearranging themselves. Pages flipped on their own. Dust settled in spirals. One night, Sister Maria found a new parchment on her desk. It wasn't handwritten. It was branded, as if the letters had burned their way into the paper. A passage in Latin none could translate. But when read aloud, the crucifix in the room shattered, and every candle in the convent snuffed out simultaneously. Maria never entered that room again. Aurelia took to standing in the gardens beneath the dead fig tree. No fruit had grown there in decades, but now strange buds formed, pale, veined, and pulsing slightly. Birds refused to perch on its branches. Bees avoided the flowers entirely. And once, Sister Judith claimed to have seen the bark move, breathing. When she leaned in to listen, she heard weeping inside the trunk, like a girl crying softly for her mother. One night, the convent bell rang 13 times. There were only 12 hours marked on its face, and yet it tolled the 13th as if it had always existed. The sisters gathered, but no one would enter the tower. They watched from the courtyard as the bell swung without wind, and a faint silhouette stood beside it, a figure in a habit too small, eyes glowing with the same golden hue Aurelia once held. But Aurelia was in her room, wasn't she? The Mother Superior descended into the archives the next morning, seeking records, answers, anything. What she found was not listed in any register. A parchment, centuries old, sealed in wax marked with a spiral. When she broke it open, her eyes turned white, and she whispered something no one understood. She locked herself in her quarters after that, and began writing furiously, pages upon pages of script that bled through the paper. She wouldn't eat, wouldn't speak, only wrote. Aurelia watched all of this unfold without expression. Some began saying she wasn't Aurelia at all, that the real girl never made it to the convent, that what lived there was something else, something that wore her blindness like a mask and her voice like a borrowed hymn. And as days turned to weeks, the sisters aged faster. Hair grayed, hands trembled, faith cracked like ice in spring. But Aurelia remained untouched by time. When Sister Beatrice finally broke, she demanded answers.
stormed into Aurelia's room with a crucifix in one hand and holy water in the other. What happened inside has never been fully told, only that when she emerged, she had torn out her own eyes and whispered, "Now I see." She wandered the rounds for 3 more days before vanishing completely. No footsteps, no blood, just a habit folded neatly beneath the chapel pew. The convent began to rot from within. Walls wept, statues bled, doors locked themselves, and Aurelia, silent, radiant, untouchable, waited. For what, no one knew, but the veil between this world and the next thinned in her presence, and whatever watched from behind her eyes grew bolder with each hour.
It was Sister Magdalena who first dared to open the hidden reliquary beneath the altar, a space sealed centuries ago, known only to the eldest abbesses through oral lore and fear. It took 3 nights of prayer and fasting before she found the courage. She waited until the bells were silent and the moon was hidden, then descended alone with only a single candle and trembling hands. What she found was not relics or bones, as she had expected. The chamber was dry, preserved unnaturally, and lined with murals not in paint, but scorched into the stone. The images twisted as she looked at them. Nuns with open mouths but no eyes, saints weeping ink, a Christ whose head was bowed not in sorrow, but in listening. And at the center, a likeness of Aurelia, centuries before her birth, eyes golden even in the stone. In the center of the room sat a black book, bound in something that smelled of myrrh and rot. The pages shimmered slightly, as though resisting attention. Sister Magdalena opened it. For hours she sat. No one knows what she read, but when she returned to the surface, her voice was gone. Not hoarse, gone. Her throat intact, her lungs strong, but not a word would leave her. And in her eyes that same golden gleam. The convent began to fragment, not only in brick and beam, but in time. Sisters began reliving events they had not lived through, visions of trials, of drownings, of rituals performed in forgotten languages. One nun, Sister Aurelia, claimed to have seen herself as a child walking the halls, despite having never visited the convent before adulthood. Another found letters written in her own hand, dated a century prior. And Aurelia, no longer silent, but singing. Her hymns were not of praise or penitence, but of binding, of awakening, of unmaking. They didn't rhyme, didn't follow melody, yet every ear strained to hear them. Those who did bled from the nose. Those who tried to write them down found their hands spelling new symbols, spirals, inverted halos, eyes inside mouths. The walls absorbed the songs. The stones hummed faintly with her voice. Sister Leonora attempted to leave. She packed her things in silence, offered no explanation, and stepped through the main gate. She was seen 2 days later, outside the convent walls, facing inward, unmoving. She had dug a circle into the earth with her bare hands, nails torn and bleeding. When they tried to pull her away, she screamed, "The circle keeps her asleep! You broke it! "You fools! You broke it!" In the reflection of holy water, strange faces began to appear. Not monstrous, but familiar. Loved ones long gone. Old abbesses, childhood friends. They'd smile, then slowly open their mouths in terror. The sisters stopped blessing the water. They avoided mirrors, even shadows. At night, they slept in groups, holding rosaries tight enough to leave bruises. But still the whispers came. One will stay, one will call, one will open the veil. Then the birds returned. Not sparrows or crows, but owls in daylight, circling silently above the convent. They watched from rooftops and branches, heads cocked unnaturally. One nun tried to shoo them away and was found hours later with her tongue missing and feathers in her mouth. The Mother Superior declared a fast and penance, but Aurelia simply smiled and whispered, "They are watching for her return. You should too." One morning, every page in the convent's Bibles turned to ash. Just the Bibles. The hymnals, the prayer books, the journals all remained untouched. But the Word was gone. In its place, a new book appeared in the scriptorium, blank pages at first, but slowly filling with ink in the dead of night. No one dared touch it. They burned it once. It reappeared the next day exactly as it had been. And always Aurelia watched. She no longer blinked. Her eyes didn't need to. They simply saw. Everything. Every fear, every memory, every secret buried in the souls of the sisters. When she passed, no one dared meet her gaze. Not because they feared her, but because they'd fear what they'd see reflected back. Themselves, unraveling.
The fourth night after the Bibles turned to ash, a storm came, not from the sky, but from beneath. The convent walls groaned as though something massive stirred below. Doors slammed without wind, windows fractured in patterns that resembled script, ancient, unreadable, shifting. The sisters huddled in the chapel, but even there the crucifix above the altar bent ever so slightly, as if bowing to something no longer holy. Aurelia had not spoken since the book began writing itself. She no longer sang either, but in her silence something else spoke. The walls began to echo with a second voice, low, male, ancient. It said no words, just tones, like a throat clearing behind every breath. Some sisters began covering their ears with wax, sealing themselves off from whatever it was, but still they heard it, in dreams, in thoughts, in the moment before prayer. Sister Magdalena returned to the reliquary. No one saw her go, but the candlelight beneath the chapel flickered through the stone floor again. Hours passed. When she emerged, her robes were gone, replaced with what looked like shrouds. Her hands were covered in ink, but it wasn't ink. It shimmered, red, alive. Her eyes, once kind, were now endless, not in cruelty, but in knowledge too vast for sanity. She spoke one sentence before collapsing. "She's writing us out." The next morning, several sisters were missing.
Their beds undisturbed, their habits still hung neatly, yet no trace of them could be found. In the garden, flowers began blooming in the shape of hands, petals curling into knuckles, stems reaching like arms. The Mother Superior gathered the remaining sisters and declared a fast, a vigil, and prayer without pause. But the prayers faltered, as if the words were being drained from their memories. The church bells began to ring by themselves, always 13 times, always at 3:33 a.m. One sister, desperate, fled to the local village. She told the priest everything, begged for help. He agreed to come the following day, but when he arrived, he was greeted by Aurelia, who said nothing, only held up the book, now half filled. He tried to leave, but was found hours later in the nave, scribbling in Latin across the floor, his own skin serving as parchment. His eyes were milk white, and from his lips came only one word, repeated, "Rewrite." Sister Leonora finally broke. She demanded answers, demanded to know who Aurelia really was, what she had brought with her. Aurelia simply touched her cheek softly, like a mother would, and in that instant she saw, not with eyes, but with soul. She screamed until her voice gave out. Then laughter replaced it, high and hollow, echoing for hours. She never slept again, but she never left Aurelia's side either. The night sky above the convent changed. Stars vanished. The moon stayed red for 7 nights. Then it stopped moving entirely, fixed above the convent as if watching. Birds no longer flew overhead. Dogs howled and would not approach. Even the insects disappeared. The world around the convent grew quiet, not peaceful, but expectant, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Aurelia stood at the altar one night and whispered, "I didn't write it, I just remembered it." The sentence echoed, not just in the ears of the sisters, but in their minds, carved like scripture. They began to write too, on walls, on wood, on mirrors, on each other. The same shapes, the same spirals, the same psalm. None could translate it, but they all understood its purpose. To invite something, to finish something, or perhaps to begin again. And in the silence that followed, a single heartbeat echoed, not of flesh, but of stone, deep beneath the chapel floor. The book flipped to its final page, blank, waiting, and the candlelight dimmed not from wind, but from the shadow that fell across it, a shadow shaped like a nun, but taller, hollow, and grinning.
The silence after the heartbeat did not bring peace. It was a silence that pressed against the bones, that filled the lungs with something heavier than air. The sisters no longer prayed aloud. Words were not only forgotten, they were feared. Anything spoken became truth, and so they kept their mouths shut, even as they wept, even as they watched Aurelia walk barefoot into the crypt, holding the book against her chest like a child. That night, the convent itself changed shape. Corridors led to rooms that hadn't existed before. Stairs climbed upward for hours without reaching another floor. The well in the garden ran red, not with blood, but with something thicker, darker, pulsing. The walls wept, and the statues of saints turned their heads ever so slightly to watch whoever passed. In one cell, Sister Annette was found clutching a page torn from the book, her hands blistered, her face frozen in the expression of someone who had seen the moment after death. The Mother Superior locked herself in the sacristy and refused to come out. She scribbled day and night, not scripture, but numbers, long, endless equations that circled the walls like a serpent eating its tail. Her voice changed, becoming deeper, layered, as though more than one voice spoke at once. On the 7th day, she burned her own tongue out with candle flame. And only then did she say one final thing, with a smile too wide for her face. She remembers the silence before creation. Meanwhile, Aurelia was no longer Aurelia. She moved with grace too smooth to be human, like her feet never quite touched the ground. She spoke, but her mouth didn't move. The book was now complete, but unreadable to any eye that still feared God. Pages shimmered with words that bent reality. One sister attempted to destroy it, throwing it into the fire. The flames turned white, then black. Then the fireplace turned inside out, becoming a mouth that screamed her name, her true name, and swallowed her. No one spoke of that sister again. Instead, they began to prepare. Candles were placed in a circle around the altar. Nails were driven into doors not to keep things out, but in. The garden was burned, its flowers too eager to bleed. The sisters shaved their heads, bathed in ash, and sewed their mouths shut with golden thread. But Aurelia only watched, and waited, and wrote. With each word, another bird fell from the sky. With each page turned, another shadow slipped between cracks in the stone, growing taller, hungrier. Then came the night of the 13th chant. At precisely 3:33 a.m., the convent filled with voices, not from the sisters, but from beneath the floorboards, from inside the stone, from behind the mirrors. Chants in a language older than Latin, older than flesh. The book lifted on its own, hovering above the altar, glowing faintly red. Aurelia wept, not from fear, but from joy. Her tears dripped on the floor and sizzled, carving the final lines of the psalm into the stone. One by one, the sisters fell to their knees, not in reverence, but in surrender. Eyes rolled back, hands outstretched. They chanted too now, though their mouths remained sewn. The sounds came from within, from their throats, their bellies, their bones. And then the altar split open, not cracked, not shattered, but unfolded like a box that had never been sealed. Inside was not stone, but stairs, leading down, spiraling, endless. Aurelia descended, the book cradled in her arms. She looked back once, smiled, and disappeared into the dark. The altar resealed. The chants stopped. The sisters collapsed, breathing, but never waking again. The convent returned to stillness. The moon resumed its orbit. Birds sang once more, but only in minor chords. And in the chapel, the book remained, closed, waiting. They say the convent stands still, unchanged by time, untouched by light. Tourists who dare approach it find only overgrowth and silence.
But those who truly listen hear it, the 13th chant, faint, carried by wind that smells like old parchment and burnt roses. Some claim to have seen her, the girl with the blank eyes and blood on her veil, standing behind broken windows. Others speak of waking up with ash under their fingernails after dreaming of red pages fluttering like moths. No one remembers the real name of the convent. Maps avoid its location. GPS systems lose signal. But the book remains somewhere inside, waiting for someone foolish enough or curious enough to open it again. And when that happens, Aurelia will walk the stairs once more, not to descend this time, but to rise, to write a new psalm in the name of silence, and ink it in the dreams of those who dare to listen. This has been another story from Convent Nightmares. If you're still breathing, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more haunted whispers, and leave a comment below with your city and country, so the silence knows where to find you. Some psalms should never be read, some never stop being written.